Tonight we're having this film screening, and Sunshine Lichauco de Leon, who's a freelance-based journalist in Manila in the Philippines, has come in to talk about this. So she's going to give a short introduction, screen the film, talk about it after, and then we'll have time for Q&A. Sunshine has written for many media outlets, The Guardian, Forbes, CNN, Los Angeles Times, USA Today. She's also reported for American and British public radio, such as PRI, BBC's The World, NPR's Newscast, and BBC's Outlook. When not reporting, she has worked as a local producer for foreign documentary teams on projects for BBC Radio, Australia's SBS, Europe's Arte channel, and America's public broadcasting station, and has also served as a fixer for foreign TV media, including CNN and NBC News. Curiosity, Adventure, and Love is her first film. She's also written a children's book called Goatee, the Real Kid, Why Children Are Not Kids. So let's welcome Sunshine.
Hi, as Kyle said, my name is Sunshine Lichauco de Leon, and I'm a freelance journalist based in Manila, normally reporting stories about the Philippines for international media. I'd like to welcome you to the screening of my first documentary film, which is called Curiosity, Adventure, and Love, and thank all of you for coming. I am the film's co-producer, co-director, and co-writer, or as I sometimes call myself, the film slave. When people ask me what the film is about, the best thing I can say is it's a blend of three threads woven together. The story of my now 107-year-old American grandmother Jessie's life, the story of much of the history of the Philippines that she has seen since arriving in Manila in the 1930s, and a story that shares the wisdom and insights of a 107-year-old lady who has literally seen the world grow up. Making this film was my own cross-cultural international journey, and definitely the hardest thing I've ever done. The film was made over 6 years, across 4 time zones, and filmed by at least 5 different people. My co-producer, Suzanne Richardon, who is also half Filipina, lived between New York and Los Angeles. Myself and my assistant were in Manila. Justin Weinrich, the editor, was in New York City. And Baptiste Charvet, who composed original music for the film, was in France. Although they are not here today, I would like to thank them for making this dream into a reality. The idea of sharing my grandmother, or as I call her, Nana's stories, came to me as I watched her over many years tell stories to people who came through her life, and I saw their interested, fascinated reaction to those stories. I thought that she was the perfect character through which I could get people interested in the history of the Philippines, which so many people, both inside and outside of the Philippines, know too little about. I also have been following her around for years with pen and paper, taking note of what I call Nana Isms, which are poetic one-line pieces of wisdom that she randomly comes up with at various points of conversation on any topic from love and marriage to compassion, tolerance, and forgiveness. I feel that the wisdom she has accumulated over a century of life has tremendous relevance in today's fast-changing and increasingly more technologically driven world, and I wanted to share them with everybody. Speaking of which, I wanted to ask you to make sure to watch the film through the end of the credits until the music ends, as there is a special dedication scene at the end, which I think you will enjoy. In closing, I wanted to say that it's my hope that the film encourages people to be more curious about history, to be more adventurous in their own lives, and to look at each other with more compassion and love. Thank you.
Hi. Well, I'm half Filipino as well, and I feel like your story really captured like the heart of the Filipina. Like your grandmother really represents how strong that we can be, and how like vulnerability and showing empathy can become such a strong trait that like has an impact on other cultures especially. And I feel like your grandmother really represents like the generosity and hospitality that Filipinos really do have. And I really appreciated that film because it made me feel really like homesick, because I just came back from home, but 2 weeks ago, and I want to go back now after watching that.
Please come. You can meet her if you like. She takes visitors. She still very much enjoys. She always says people, Yeah, she says that people walk into her house a stranger and leave as a friend. So I still bring people to meet her, and she always enjoys it.
Thank you so much for sharing this film. I thought it was really interesting that you have a background as a journalist and that this is kind of a different and more personal story. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about the experience of sharing this story at different screenings and hearing different people's reactions and things like that.
Oh, it's been the most powerful thing ever. In fact, it made me want to make another film. I was sort of an accidental filmmaker. I never wanted to be a filmmaker. Honestly, I didn't even watch many documentaries before I made this film. I just had a story that I wanted to tell. And in the beginning, I thought it would be a book, because that's all I could think of when I was in my 20s. And then someone met my grandmother and said, book, forget it, make a film. The fact that she can talk at her age makes her so much more compelling. So I very naively said, okay, I'm going to make a film, having no idea what that meant. I said it for it took me 20 years from the time the idea I had to tell her story and actually made the film. So in terms of, the only thing I knew how to do was ask questions. So that, in terms of journalism, the crossover was that. And then I suppose as the story came together, I had some sense of how to tell a story. But I actually, funny enough, was a print journalist, print and radio. And I did TV, but I did just TV production. I never wrote, I skipped the whole part about learning how to write a a TV piece and went straight to film. So it was a big leap. But in terms of, I never understood, I never imagined the reception that the film would get. When you work on a film for 7 years and you start filming your grandmother when she's 98, all you can think of is that you hope you finish the film while she's still around to see it. So that was really like, have to finish the film. I never thought beyond what will be the impact of the film. Will people like it? Where will it go, et cetera. So the fact that we got into festivals and screenings around the world was just amazing to me. And I didn't realize that once the film finished, I would have another job, which was marketing and promoting the film. So I literally took a year and just said, I'm going to follow the film. And wherever we were accepted, I went. And that was the best decision I've made, because I've been with audiences all around the world, all ages, all backgrounds, and it's amazing to see how people react to the film. It brings these 7 years of torture that I went through to make the film. It makes it totally worth it. And I feel like, it's reinforced the power of video to tell stories, and in a way that not just tell them, but get people to react and linger with them, I guess. Because people see the film and then they write me later, and it stays. People, the film caused people to actually write Nana or write a review, and so it's nice to have that kind of impact, that it lingers. So there was a part of me that said one day, well, if you really want to affect people, use video. You know what I mean? That was sort of the lesson I got. Secondly, hold on, I now forgot the second. The film, stars. Oh, yes, okay. So it occurred to me, I don't know, sometime last year, that as my grandmother now is older, because my grandmother collected people. I mean, she met so many people in her life, and just there were thousands of stories, which made it so hard to tell her story, because I didn't know which ones to tell. But I like the fact that as she gets older and she doesn't go out as much and she doesn't have the ability to reach as many people, that the film is sort of taking off from that. So I love the fact that the film, I wanted people to learn Philippine history, but I also wanted them, increasingly as I listened to all her stories, I wanted to spread the way, I call it Nana's way, the way that she looks at the world, and the way she looks at humanity, and the way that she looks at our role in it, and how, what we can and can't and should and shouldn't be doing. And it's that lens. She has a very interesting lens in which she looks at things. So I'm really happy that the screenings allow me to spread that way. And that's actually what most people have reacted to. They like the history, but there's always like, I've learned this from your grandmother. She's taught me this. I want my grandfather to see it so he realizes he can still be active at 95. I mean, there's a lot. So it's nice to have that effect.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing your grandmother's story, and I'm sure I'm not alone in saying that this was a really impactful and wonderful film, so thank you so much for that. I have sort of a two-part question.
Go ahead.
First of all, you mentioned already that your grandmother was aging, and part of your motivation behind this was the desire to capture her story and everything, but I'm curious as to whether or not there was any particular story that motivated you to want to make the documentary is the first part. And the second part of the question is, you mentioned that there are tons more stories. If you had to add one more, is there any one in particular that you would want to add? Thank you.
Oh, God. Sorry.
No pressure.
No, it's just a lifetime of experiences there, so it's hard to. Wait, so your first question was, remind me? I got stuck on the second.
The first part was whether or not there was a story in particular that kind of sparked the desire to make this documentary.
No, I don't think there was. I think it was just watching her and seeing. I was 27, 28. I was living in New York, had no idea what I was going to do with my life. But I would visit her house in Boston all the time. And she was living there, and there was something about being in the house and seeing people come over and the energy that grew from it, and people just staying up late and wanting to know more and more and more. And yeah, I don't think there was one story that I can think of. If I think of it later, I'll let you know. It was just like, yeah, it was just a realization one day that never went away. And I also thought that, our family's multicultural, for lack of a better word, and sort of people have moved and married different people and lived in different, we've all grown up in different places, so our attachment and understanding and knowledge of the Philippines is less and less with every generation. And I realized that I actually, of all her grandchildren, have the strongest ties to the Philippines. I didn't realize this at the time, but I did think one day, well, if she's gone, all this is away. You know what I mean? Like, we won't know where we come from. We won't know the story of how we got to where we are. So I think it was that thought that made me think of the idea to do the story. And the second, what was on the cutting room story floor? Oh God, there's so many. There was one World War II story that I thought was nice, or post World War II, I guess. And it's just a very random things happened to Nana kind of story. But during the war, my grandparents kept everything of value in my grandfather's law office. And during liberation, as I understand it, things were being taken from the office buildings and burned. And so there was a pile of stuff to be burned, and it was an American soldier during liberation who happened to walk by this pile. And in it, he saw this diary, this leather-bound diary that my grandmother had written in the 1930s, 36, I think, when she traveled around the world by ship with my grandmother, and it was like their extended honeymoon. And so she had written a diary of everything she had seen in pencil. And he saw it, and he said, this looks like it might be of value to someone, so he takes it out of the pile that's burning, and goes back to America, reads it, discovers my grandfather went to Harvard, contacts Harvard, and finds a way to find my grandfather after the war and sends it back to her. That I couldn't believe. She literally walked into my room one day with this old diary and said, oh, do you know the story of this diary? And I was like, give me that. Let's type. I was like, and I had it immediately typed up. I was like, let's type up what's in here so it doesn't disappear. Yeah, we couldn't put it in because I couldn't figure out how to put it in, but it was just a nice story, that anything's possible, I guess. Did you like the coconut story? Because that was really difficult to put in. That was not in the original script, and that was she one day, she loves coconut, and she will tell me, Sunshine, the coconut is the most useful tree in the world. There's every part of you use. And so one day she literally, and I go to the beach a lot, so she told me that story about the coconuts one day while we were filming, or maybe after we were filming. I think it was after we were filming, or maybe it was before, or maybe it was during filming, and I can't remember. And so And I remember, so one day I went over there and I said, okay, Nana, can you show me everything about the coconut? And I literally brought her a coconut. And so we sat there, okay, chop it up. You brought her an old one, I brought her a new one, and she gave me this little explanation of what you do with everything in the coconut. And while she was explaining this to me, all of a sudden I was like, you're like a coconut. It just sort of hit me. And so we filmed her audio saying that, and I would wake up and I would tell my editor and my co-producer, I was like, we have to put the coconut scene in. Okay, Sunshine, but where? They were like, it's not a normal thing. You have to find a way that it's not going to disrupt the screen. And I literally, for like months, I'd wake up in the middle of the night, okay, let's put the coconut scene here. And I would text my editor. So we tried it like 3 or 4 different places. So whenever I see that, I'm particularly happy. It just shows, like, I literally had to move it so many times until it just fit, That might be the answer to the question, actually, the coconut.
Okay. While watching the movie, it reminds me a little bit on myself. I have a 7-year-old kid, daughter, and she really likes to hear stories from my childhood. So sometimes I read good night stories, but sometimes she asks me, please tell me a story from your life. So I
Oh,
go
nice.
back to my childhood and I'm grabbing some random story out of some blue, right? And what I experience is she's very curious. She's really eager listener then, and she's really enjoying the stories that I'm trying to tell her, which reminds me in the same way like you did your story with your grandmother is maybe we all should talk much more to our fathers, grandmothers, or even our mothers or fathers, just because I think everybody of them has a good story to tell us.
I agree. And a lot of people have actually said to me after seeing this film that they either wish they could have recorded their parents or grandparents, or that they will now do it because they realize that. And they asked me, how do you do it? And I said, it's simple, just get a tape recorder and start talking. You don't have to video. You know, if you can at least get the stories down, it helps.
Thank you for a wonderful movie. You said you weren't prepared for the reactions to the film. What are your plans for a next project?
Well, I'll answer that first for this film. So this film now, if any of you have friends in America, it's now available on iTunes and about 15 other platforms, which I've listed on our website and on Facebook. We have a sales agent who is trying to sell it in the rest of the world because we have it subtitled in French, Spanish, English, and now Japanese. I hope to show it in Japan again. I hope that this is just the first of many screenings, so please tell everybody. And then in the Philippines, I'm starting to put it in schools. So I'm trying to put it, actually, I want to put it in as many schools in Asia as possible, not just the Philippines. But a lot of students have actually seen it and asked me to put it in their schools. So we just had our first screening at the Montessori school in Manila last week. It was the response of students was really good, actually age 11 and up. So I'm still trying to get this film out there in as many formats as possible. Eventually we'll have it online for purchase, hopefully in Asia, and DVDs. And if I get my way, on Philippine Airlines in-flight. I'm targeting them too. And anyone has any ideas, like I want to, this film just took over my life, so and I believe in it. And so I really want to get it out there to as many people as possible, all ages, religions, countries, languages, And then we're making a new film. So having discovered the power of film through this film, I found myself accidentally making a second film, which is another documentary, but it's completely different. It's set in Jordan, in Zatari, which is the largest Syrian refugee camp outside of Syria, 80,000 people. And it's basically about the power of photography and mentorship to help heal children who've been through war or who've come from traumatic warlike situations and had to flee their homes. It helps, it's about a young refugee himself who, in order to overcome his own devastation of being put in this camp or having to go to this camp, he decides to teach children photography and out of his little hut, and he teaches like 80 children over the last 2 years. And it's a story about 3 of these teenage boys who basically sort of, photography was what kept them believing in anything and believing in themselves in the future, and how they reconnect to life through taking pictures. So yeah, we shot it, and now we are raising money to edit it. So yes, if anyone's interested in that, I'm happy to send more information. It's called Zatari, Through the Lens, and the idea is that through the lens, if a child or adult lives in a less than ideal circumstance, and it's not pretty around them, and they take a picture, learn to take a picture, and someone says to a child, that's a really beautiful picture, suddenly the child says, oh, what else can I do that's beautiful? It's teaching them to see what's around them in a different way. And in the film, the boys actually have an exhibit of their work on the camp, so everybody can come and see it. So it's a positive film about refugees, which I think the world needs.
Thank you. And I had a question regarding the film music. What made you choose the French composer?
Because he was a friend of my director. He gave us a very good price, and he was talented. I'm not sure which of those was most important. But, and actually, to be honest, we were not going to use a composer because we didn't have the budget. And when I saw the cut that the editor had chosen the music of, my producer called me and she said, you know what, I really think that music will change everything in this film. I said, how much? Because I didn't really understand the power of music in a film. I had never really been taught about it, thought about it. But when he sent me the music, I called him up and I said, I think I'm in love with your music because I'm listening to it without the film. So I really think the music in this case, he did an amazing job. Nana has a theme now. It's called Jesse's theme.
Hello.
Hi.
So I'm actually a student filmmaker myself, and I have done documentaries.
I should learn from you.
Oh, no. I was learning from you. And as a student filmmaker, there's a lot of challenges that I will face, and continue to face. So with this film, what was the most challenging thing about creating the story of your grandmother?
I have a list. I'm not sure what the most challenging thing was. First was the story. How do you know that perfect blend? How do you know what stories to choose? What's going to be the most important? Second, the fact that she was 98 when I started filming her, and we couldn't really shoot B-roll with her in it. I couldn't bring her around Manila and shoot her doing things that I'd like her to do. So coverage was huge, and there's not a lot of World War II or any historical footage lying around the Philippines. Like, we really had to hunt for it. But the hunting was okay. It was really just trying to figure out what to cover. And then we couldn't choose stories. There were stories that we wanted that there was no way to cover it with images, so we had to leave those out, you know. Sound is very important. I learned this because we shot some interviews that were great, and I couldn't use them because something was wrong with the sound. What else is important? The footage. Yeah, that was basically. The technical, because I was not trained in anything technical, and I had to supervise things that I didn't understand. So, but you won't have that problem if you're actually studying documentary filmmaking. Yeah, that was pretty much it. But my advice actually is stick to what you believe is right, because I never thought that the film was a historical film. I never thought it was a biography. Like, in my mind, it was always a blend. But people would say to me, no, documentaries are about one thing. You have to be able to summarize it simply in one thing. And I was like, I can't. It's not going to be the power of the film. And I think I was right. I didn't know how I was going to do it. But so even if people tell you that your idea is not what people normally do, you should still do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I just have a question, just kind of a fun one. But what is your favorite of the Nana Isms, as you kind of called them, that she has said in the film or off camera? Some of the lessons that kind of you brought with you throughout your life and all that.
Oh my God, there's so many. I actually, favorite Nana Isms. Well, I love the one about home that we ended the film with. That came out of an interview I did with her, because people used to always ask me where my home was and where I was from, because I was raised in different places with different cultural influences. And so one day I turned the question to her, and she came up with that perfect line. So I love that one. I like the one about the fire, about love and marriage, being always in a state of being able to make fire. There's another one she said to me the other day, listen to your mind, open your heart. Oh yeah, listen to your mind, open to your heart. Open your mind, listen to your heart, and everything will fall into place. That was a good one. Not in the film. One day I might actually make a book of Nana Ism, so I'll let you know and you can read the rest.
Hi, Sunshine. I had two questions. One is, you talked about originally you thought you might write a book because you're a print journalist or a writer. I don't imagine it, but have you ever thought about, would you turn the movie into a book now? And even if you haven't, what if in written form are the things that you could do that you couldn't do in a film?
What could I do in a film? Well, I could tell stories that don't need pictures. I could tell stories that didn't need coverage. So there'd be a lot more latitude in what we put in the book and how we tell the story, because we can break it up into chapters, we can organize it in different ways. I think. Never written a book, that would be my guess. Could we still do a book? Yes, I suppose anything's possible. I don't know if I would write it. I might consult with who writes it, but I'm not sure that I would be the best person to write it. I've done stories on her and on the film, which is hard enough. The press have asked me to write, but I don't know if I would be the one to write the book. But it is still an option out there. I still collect things. I still film her. I still write down what she says. So it's an ongoing process, or just a bad habit, in the hope that maybe one day it'll be useful for something. So maybe I'll write it. We'll see. Or maybe it'll be a blend. Maybe part of the stories will go into something else. I don't know. You know.
The second thing I wanted to ask was, obviously her story is complex and crosses continents and decades and eras, and so much is going on. And you know, I'm a journalist as well, as you know, and it's challenging to make a story like that cohesive and actually work, you know, as a product, so to speak, whether it's a film or a book or an article. So I'm wondering if you have anything you learned from this process, from that you could share with us about what, you know, how do you make such a complex story work? How does it come all together and come out so smoothly in the end? Like it's just it runs through and you don't even notice you're sitting there for an hour and a half watching a film.
I wish I knew. No, it's something that I had to keep in mind always. Like when we were choosing what went in, when we were choosing, I mean, I had to, my co-producer would always say to me, "Okay, Sunshine, World War II, you get 3 stories, pick them." I was like, "No, how do I do this?" You know, so it's tough. I mean, I think that how to keep, like I was saying about the balance, the biography, the history, and humanity. The other balance that we were trying to keep was to have a storyline that made sense, but to keep the poetry, which I found inherent to my grandmother, the tree, the house, and the river. To me, they were all characters. So it was constantly just sort of weaving and balancing and checking each section. Does this go? Does it work? You know, I mean, the actual process, like I literally I took apart every interview, wrote down all the story titles I could think of, all the historical facts. And then of the historical facts, I had to think, okay, what is the most important thing we want people to know, because we're not making a historical documentary? What do people need to walk away with? They need to know it was an American colony. They need to know how it became an American colony. You know what I mean? Just like the key broad strokes of doing it. And it helped that I had an editor. I mean, I worked on every part of this project closely, but the editor I hired had never been to the Philippines and never met my grandmother. So when I outlined everything, and I said, these are all the key points I think are important. These are the key narratives. These are the quotes. These are the anecdotes. And then I had him look at it. And I said, what do you find most interesting? Someone who knows nothing about the country. So he helped me take out the essence, you know, like the backbone. And then I worked with him to put the Nana back in, you know, the heart and the feeling back in. So it's just constantly trying different ways to maintain, but we always had that in our mind. It has to flow, it has to flow, it has to be balanced. So, I mean, every detail, you just have to cover, you know, there were sentences where we cut her sentence. She says it in 3 sentences, we cut it to 1, just because it's stronger. You know, it's like every tiny detail, every image, every fade from one thing to another, all those things you have to keep in mind. And I think a lot of it's just instinct. You have to feel it. And I did a lot of test screenings in my apartment, where I'd invite people, feed them, and make them fill out a questionnaire. just so that I could get a sense, and then we'd get feedback from that. Okay, does this work? Is it falling apart? Where are they lost, et cetera? It's like a science and an art at the same time, right? I had to actually leave out entire chunks of her life. Like, she has a house in Boston, which people know a lot of Filipinos stayed there over the years, and there were a lot of stories to come out of there. The time that she was a Philippine ambassador, his wife and my grandfather was ambassador to the United Kingdom. I wanted to put those in, but it just, the story, you know, my partner was very strict with me. She's like, we can't go sideways. Like, we don't have enough. People are going to get lost. We have to keep them on track. So the tough decisions like that, you just have to let go of.
Sunshine, the Philippines is going through a really interesting and kind of disturbing political moment now under President Duterte. And it struck me in watching this film that your grandmother seems to be the very antithesis of that kind of person. And she's a full generation older than he was born in 1945. She's a full generation older. But they both lived through the experience of colonialism. And that's been one of his kind of platforms. So I'm curious if you've had conversations about that with her, how she sees that, and if people of her generation, what their attitudes are on that history of colonialism.
Her generation, most of them actually aren't around anymore to ask. Sorry. in terms of, okay, so since Duterte has been elected, she's gotten older, so she's not, my grandmother's still very much with it and engaging and witty and all that, but she's not as engaged in what's going on in the Philippines as she used to be, so probably better that she's not. I mean, she has a sense of how bad it is, but we don't really talk about it that much just because I kind of don't want to let her ruin her happy image of what she remembers the Philippines to be. I mean, she did say to me years ago, she said, Sunshine, I've seen a lot in my life, and the world's a hell of a mess was her words, and because I think she could see things coming, and she said, in the Philippines now there's, what'd she say? She said there's so much, what's the word she used? Hold on. It was like so much anger, so much hatred. Like it was like everybody's dividing, and so she could see that, and it makes her sad because she's seen the country destroyed, rebuilt, and she's seen it in so many different phases. So I think you're right. She is the antithesis, and I mean, she was very upset with the she hears certain things and she'll react, like the controversy over the statue of the comfort women. She had a lot to say. She was, when people came over for dinner, she'd be like, "Did you hear about that on the news?" So she'll pick up on certain things. As far as what other people her generation, I mean, it's hard for me to speak for that. I think that, but I don't think that Duterte's views on colonialism are the way the majority of people think who lived through that time. I think that, I mean, if you're talking about American colonialism, I mean, there's not, in general, I don't find a lot of anger or hatred in the Philippines towards any former colonial power. I mean, I think that Filipinos would like people to know what happened to their history. They'd like people to know and understand it, which most people don't, whether it was Americans, Japanese, Spanish, but there's not the level of anger or that you see from certain people in the government.
Can I ask, what was her reaction to the film, and is there anything she wished she'd left out or anything you wish you'd included?
Oh, there's lots of things I wish I included. She couldn't understand why I was making this film. When I first told her I wanted to make a film, I mean, I got a lot of, what? Why? No one cares about history. My life is normal. Why? I'm private, everything. And I kept having to convince her. I was like, Nana, please, you think I'd spend all this time and money to do this if I didn't think it was a good idea? So she didn't really understand what I was doing, although I guess I could say I didn't either. So when she saw the film, actually, that was the happiest moment of my life. I actually turned the house into a movie theater, invited 50 people, sat her there, and I actually was able to sit there holding her hand, watching her as she watched the film about her life. It was pretty amazing. And she talked afterwards, and she said, "Thank you for giving my life a sense of perfect purpose and respectability." That's what she said. And she said that the film reminded her of a lot of things that she'd forgotten, and she really loved it. She looked at me, she goes, "You're a good producer." And whereas before she'd always told me I was a writer, so it was a big moment for her. And she, one of the nicest things I overheard at the opening, at the launch, that someone said to her, "Oh, you must be proud of Sunshine." And she looked at them in her very Nana way, and she says, "I'm proud of Sunshine because she's my friend." She said, "Anybody can have a granddaughter, but not everybody can have a friend," which in that moment made the film completely worth making. So I think she just looked at me and she goes, "You really were listening to me, weren't you?" So no, she's not the type of person to take it apart and say, "I wish you'd put this in, I wish I didn't." I was careful what I put in. I mean, I knew that there wouldn't be anything in it that would disturb her.
Thank you, Sunshine, for your movie.
Thank you.
And I was struck by that story in her narration about the egg shells mixed with calamansi as part of their meal. It struck me because it tells me about how hard really life was during the Second World War II. But I was also wondering the missing partly of history, where martial law. I didn't see something about that, right? So probably because you told us about she was in America during the time after the death of your father.
Grandfather, yes.
So our grandfather, so most likely not much has been shared in terms of how life also was difficult during that part of Philippine history. So I just want to know that probably in the next film that you might be contemplating, it can be also a good source of information how, if she happened to be in the Philippines during the time of Marcos regime, and can tell us also some striking story about like eggshells mixed with calamansi. I don't know how hard the life was from her point of view. Thank you.
I actually think someone should make a film with all these people, interviewing other people about that time period, just to catch it, to get it now while it's still fresh in their minds. But yes, thank you. No, originally I wanted to include Philippine history up until present in the film, but as I learned about filmmaking, I realized it wouldn't have served the film well. But I'll look through the footage one day and see what we have from that era. I know we asked her. Hi.
I come from the Philippines, and I just noticed that you always say Nana. And you know, in the Philippines, in Tagalog,
Lola.
that's really Lola.
Yes, yeah.
For grandmother.
Yeah.
But of course, we also kind of train our kids to say Nana or Nanay, actually, because we want to feel younger or whatever.
Yeah.
But also,
I didn't know that. Okay.
no, I mean, you know, like I'm now a grandmother myself, and I don't want to be called Lola. But so some grandkids will call their grandmother Nanay, or as I call myself, Lala. Anyway, just to make it modernized. I was just wondering, growing up, were you sort of calling your grandmother as Nanay or Lola, and
Yes.
your grandfather as Lolo instead of, or Tatay?
I never knew my grandfather, so yeah, I still don't actually know what to call him when we're referring to him. But my grandmother was always Nana, and I have no idea why. I don't recall. Both my grandmothers were Nana. I have no idea. Someone must have said it, and I copied it, or someone else. Because I have cousins that are on the Chinese-Filipino side, and they call her Popo, you know, so someone else calls her, like everybody has their own name for her, depending on what culture they came from. But hopefully we can come back and find other schools or other organizations that will host us, because
We'll be
the
happy to
reception's been
screen your
good.
next film.
Thank you. I'll send you information on it.
Well, everyone, let's thank Sunshine for.
Thank you.